Okay, so I think we'll start now that it's 11 and there's going to be more people trickling in, but that should be fine. So hello there. Welcome to the last day of the American School in Japan's 4th Annual Space Club Conference. I'm Michio, a senior, and I'm joined today with Juan, Selena, Spencer, and Rashawn. We are the leaders of the Space Club, where our mission is to spread the love of space science throughout the ASIJ community and beyond. It means so much to us that you're here making this event possible. After Mr. Calnan's presentation, there will be a live Q&A session. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the Q&A chat. The conference is being recorded as well, so if you would like to watch it again on demand, it will be uploaded to our website soon after. Our speaker today is Mr. Gary Calnan. Mr. Calnan is the co-founder and CEO of CisLunar Industries. CisLunar Industries focuses on keeping space clean and improving in-space production by the reuse and recycling of space debris. Take it away, Mr. Calnan.
Thank you, Michio. Thanks for the introduction. And thank you so much for having me today. I'm truly honored to be joining you for this year's conference. I've seen some of the previous speakers, and you guys are able to bring in some pretty amazing people who come to this conference. So I'm honored to be among them. As you heard, my name is Gary Calnan. I'm a husband, a father of one daughter, an entrepreneur, and a co-founder and CEO of CisLunar Industries. And my path to getting where I am right now is not the usual one you see in the space industry. I'm not an engineer. I don't have a history with established aerospace companies. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a finance professional. And I have a love and a passion for space, and I want to make an impact in humanity's upcoming expansion out beyond Earth, which I believe that we're just right on the threshold of. So I'm really excited to be working on this and to tell you about this path, and hopefully in sharing my path for getting here and a little bit about what we're doing now, I can give you some insight into how you can become an entrepreneur if you want to, what it's like, what you'll have to face, and what kind of attributes you might want to have to pursue that path, and a little bit of what it looks like. We got a bunch of slides that I pulled together to cover a couple different areas. I'll go through them pretty fast today to leave plenty of time for Q&A at the end, and I'm happy to spend as much time as you guys want. So I'll get into it right now. Let's see here. There we go. All right, so like I said, I'm going to talk about my path, my non-traditional path into space industry. Also want to mention the International Space University, so I'll tell you a little bit about that. That was really my pivotal and my entry into the space sector, and absolutely amazing experience. And then a little bit about the company. So first, finding and rediscovering my calling. I really have come to believe that this path that I'm on with space entrepreneurship is a calling for me, is what I've always really been meant to do, and sort of was there in the beginning, and it kind of went down a winding path, and I'm back again. So just at the beginning, I've always had a lifelong love of space. I played with Estes rockets, made those, and I remember as a young child when they started launching the shuttle. I was, in grade school, very early age, and they used to gather us around this tiny TV. They'd pull everybody out of class into one of these common areas, and they'd sit us down, and we'd all huddle around this little TV, and it was such a big deal. And it really sparked my interest in space and what was possible. And at the same time, I also have always had sort of a love for entrepreneurship. My first taste of entrepreneurship happened when I was, let's see, it was 1989. It was at this U.S. Senior Open golf tournament in my small town, and parents helped me get set up to sell beverages and lemonade and stuff to a bunch of people coming out of that golf tournament. And I think we made maybe $150, and we felt like we were just filthy rich at that time. It was like it was one of those things that little kids do that really sparks that interest. Fast forward a bit, my career took me eventually to the United States Air Force Academy to start with. I went to the U.S. Air Force Academy in 1996. I went there with the intention and hope to follow a path to becoming an astronaut. I majored in astronautical engineering. I had this vision to become a test pilot, and then eventually an astronaut. But it turns out that after a couple of years at the Air Force Academy, I decided that the life in the military was not really for me, and I made the decision to leave the Air Force Academy, and I transferred up to the University of Colorado in Boulder, and this is, I think, I tell this part of the story because I think it's important to know that you can have hiccups along the way and things can turn out okay. When I transferred to CU, it was not the smoothest of adjustments, going from military lifestyle to absolute freedom. And my academics suffered, and I ended up not being able to get into the engineering school. So this changed my path a bit. And I ended up deciding to take an economics degree and get a business minor. And since I couldn't, design things as an engineer, I saw sort of entrepreneurship as another way to invent things and design a path and express my creativity. And that's where my first startup began, this Night Riders Inc., which was a company to drive people home in their own cars when they had too much to drink. It was a designated driver service. And what we did is we sent people out on these little mini motorcycles. Let me show you this little thing. I don't know if this is going to work, but I thought I could show this short clip that we made when I was doing this business. This was my first startup. We did it for about 4 years. And we made this video to try to promote our company as the basis for like a reality TV show. But I think it's kind of funny. I don't know if the sound is going to come through, but we'll see if it works. Just like you might find it interesting. Getting the sound? No.
I don't think we can hear the sound right now.
Anyway, I just thought I'd show you a little bit of what it looked like, these little motorcycles that we had, and you can find this on YouTube if you're curious. But so anyway, starting right out of college is one of those classic entrepreneurship experiences that people hear about, where you living off ramen and you have nothing to lose, and this was the reality of the situation. And it's a different kind of startup to do in that phase of life than it is when like I am now when I have a family to take care of. There was a lot of learnings in it. We learned everything from, we didn't know anything really going into it except basic business classes. And when you do entrepreneurship, you have to be ready to learn everything yourself. As anything you need to find out, you figure out what you need to find out to do something, and then you find the information to learn it. And we did that for everything from accounting to marketing to working on motorcycle engines and all kinds of random things to try to figure this out. We were able to learn how to do this, and we were able to negotiate sponsorships with major beer companies in the area. We won awards. We were able to raise capital from local angel investors, and all of this was basically self-taught. And these were many of our successes. There were also many failures along the way. We tried lots of strategies that didn't work, and this was a great learning experience for me to lay the groundwork for what I'm doing now. The key thing here is that even though in the end the business was not really a financial success, we were successful in a lot of other dimensions. We ended up taking a lot of people home safely in their cars, and we really learned a lot from the experience. And I guess the point I'm trying to communicate to you guys is that it's okay to have a lot of failures. You have to have a lot of failures if you're going to be an entrepreneur. It's the only way to learn what you need to learn and try to move forward. And eventually, if you decide that the thing you're working on doesn't work, you can move on to the next one. And it's just something to try not to take too hard. I will say that my experience with Night Riders, I was all in sort of emotionally, and when it didn't work out, it was hard to take the failure of that business and move into some other entrepreneurial experience. So what I ended up doing was I spent about 12 years between that and when I went on to my next path. And this is actually, in the end, it proved to be a good experience as well, building up a basis of understanding for what I'm doing now. So, along the way, I was an analyst for in consulting and finance for this company, Convergys. I became an investment analyst and portfolio manager. I earned my CFA charter. I got married. I had a baby. And finally, I was director of corporate finance at a software company in Denver. And then, I just all along the way, while I was going through this process of learning, and there was a lot of important things to learn from these big companies too, because they've had honed a lot of processes, and I carry some of that forward with me as well. But all along the way, I had been watching the space sector go from being something that only governments did to something that was possible for entrepreneurs to get involved in. And I had this just burning feeling that, I needed to get back to my passion for space. I needed to get back into this, and I needed to find a way to do it. And while I was hunting for that way to do it, I discovered the International Space University. And so that sort of leads me down this timeline to 2017 when I entered the International Space University. But while, just a little bit of backdrop, and this kind of points to the inspiration for CisLunar Industries as well as going to ISU. Right around the time that I was looking into this stuff, I come across this idea, this article, CisLunar Economy 101, that this friend of mine now, Carlos Entrena, wrote, and it really inspired me and instructed me on the possibilities that were available in this market. And then, the United Launch Alliance had issued this CisLunar 1000 concept that they put out, and they're talking about 1,000 people living and working in space within 30 years and a $2.7 trillion economy. And I just started to feel like, man, this is the time to get into this. I have to get in now, or I'm going to miss my opportunity. So, I made the leap based on some of that inspiration. And I told my colleagues that I was off to ISU with this little drawing that I made on my whiteboard in my cubicle, and sort of left that there while I was counting down the days to leave my corporate world and go into this crazy space world of ISU, which is really immersive. So that takes me to ISU. So ISU, International Space University, I attended their space studies program in 2017. It was in Cork, Ireland. I had never been to Ireland, so that was an added benefit. And it was truly, I saw this as my way to get into space. When I was looking at entering the space sector before, it's hard to find jobs that were anything but engineers. And I'm not an engineer, so I was trying to figure out how I was going to get in. Besides just working at a large aerospace company in their finance department, which really wasn't what I wanted to do. I wanted to be an entrepreneur and marry my love for entrepreneurship with my passion for space. So I used the ISU experience to break myself into the space community and kind of access that huge network that you can get from going through ISU. And so just a couple of things about ISU to whet your palate if you're ever considering this. You get to do lots of amazing things there, but it's really about the people that you meet. You'll see in all these pictures, they're doing cool stuff. We're meeting astronauts. We're going to Irish pubs and watching hurling matches, which is an Irish game if you're not familiar with it. Launching homemade rockets, weather balloons. I even got to sing with the ISU band every Friday, which was an amazing thing to do, as I had done it in high school, and it's like going back in time for me. We built these crazy contraptions to just practice sort of engineering. We had astronaut panels. I went to see all the sites around Ireland. And finally, as part of the Entrepreneurs project that we did there, which eventually turned into the Entrepreneurs website, I got to present my sort of entrepreneur's journey, or the beginning of it, for the first time in public on a stage as part of our final presentation. So that's sort of what you see up in the upper right corner there. But and then lastly, at ISU is where the idea for CisLunar Industries was really born. So I show some of these pictures of the early days of building a company, and it's really just, we went into, I had found some friends there who were interested in starting a company, and they had other skills that I didn't have. They were engineers, they had some experience in space, and we went into a room, we looked at a whiteboard. We wanted to build something on the edge of the frontier of space, which was, in our mind, was beyond geosynchronous orbit. It was where resources were going to be underpinning, the future of humanity in space, and so we wanted to find a niche there. And through our brainstorming process, we came up with the idea that metals and processing metals was not something that was being done yet in space, and not something that was truly being focused on. It was, asteroid mining was for water. Of course, there's metals too, but, and they always had like an idea of, okay, well, we'll get the metals and then we'll do something with them, but it was not super focused on. And we also learned about space debris. I did for the first time, really. And we just kind of thought, well, why isn't that a resource that we can use? And so we paired those two ideas together, and that's what led us to the concept for CisLunar Industries. Along the way, we applied for the Space Exploration Masters. It was our first attempt to get some funding and recognition. We were too early, but we made our run at it. And even though we didn't get in, we still went to Luxembourg and did all the same things that the people who won that competition did. We met with the incubators, we met with the government, we did all the stuff that you do. And that was just kind of one of those things you have to do as an entrepreneur. If you don't get the one way through the door, you got to find another way to get through the door. You just make your way in there and find those opportunities. Ultimately, we didn't end up doing anything with Luxembourg government. We ended up moving the company to the United States recently, and now it's headquartered here in Denver. And I thought, I could take you into what CisLunar Industries is doing right now briefly, and give you an idea of the current state of things, and then we can go into Q&A, I guess. So CisLunar Industries, our goal is to build sort of the foundation of a circular economy in space, where we're reusing all the materials we take up there, which becomes increasingly important the further out you go. And obviously we have all this debris. We want to be able to use the debris as well and clear that space up. So we want to transform space debris into a space resource. And the processes that we use to do that sort of lay the foundation for a whole materials processing industry in space. And that's where we want to make our impact. When you think about space debris, and you guys probably are familiar with this given the audience, but there's obviously a huge and growing problem with all the mega constellations that are going up. All of these orbits, these important orbits that are used for everyday things, that we all take advantage of every day, are becoming increasingly crowded. And as tens of thousands of satellites go up for these constellations, they're going to become increasingly more valuable. And the need to keep them clear is going to become even more important. So we're not the ones who are going to do all the work to keep them clear, but we think we can help those companies do their job better. And we want to look at how this could be potentially a resource. So we did some early research in the beginning into all the population of debris that's up there, the intact stuff, not the small things, but the big pieces. And we looked at upper stages in particular because they have sort of a natural or a common shape. They're all sort of cylindrical. They have a larger quantity of metals. And we looked at those and we quantified them based upon the public information through the US database. And so there's obviously more than what's here as well. But and in LEO, we came to the conclusion, if you're looking at only large upper stages, that there's over 1.2 million kilograms of material in low Earth orbit. And in geo orbit, near geo orbit, there's around 380,000 kilograms of materials across 159 stages. So there's actually quite a lot of material up there, and it's already refined. It does present an interesting opportunity for materials and some other possibilities, which I'll explain in a second here. So some of the challenges of using this material as a resource, you got the orbital mechanics. That's often a very big challenge, especially in LEO. In GEO, it's a lot easier, but in LEO, it's quite challenging because the orbital planes go in lots of different areas, and to move from one plane to another is very costly. There's technology challenges, of course. Metal processing is very nascent. We're building prototypes right now, but they're very, very early stage. Logistics technology is in development. It is already being developed, though, and it's, as opposed to 3 years ago when this really wasn't happening as much. Now we're seeing a proliferation of space tug companies and active debris removal companies like Astroscale and others that are building that infrastructure out. And in-space manufacturing is also in development. So you've got Made in Space and other companies that are, have lots of cool proposals for how to make stuff out of the metal that we want to bring to market. There's the ecosystem as a challenge, and we need all these different pieces to come together kind of at the same time to make for a viable system. And lastly, the market has always been a challenge when we're presenting this idea, because it's sort of out in the future. It's kind of like, who is this customer that we're going to be using? When are they going to come to market? How big will they be? These are hard to define right now. We can only make kind of guesses, but everyone who's involved in the space knows that this is going to be a crucial part of a future industrial economy in space. And now that the big powers, space powers, are starting to compete pretty aggressively for going back to the moon and creating an economic presence in space, there's an increasing and growing interest in supporting companies that are doing resource extraction, in-space manufacturing, and satellite servicing. We think we fit into sort of the intersection of all those things. The idea that we have right now is to create what we're calling a micro space foundry. And so our basic idea is to build a small system that is in the 100-kilogram range, that can fit on another spacecraft. It's modular, so you could have many of them if you had a larger craft. You would attach a robot to the end of it that could harvest metal from an object. So you imagine like a spacecraft that goes and grabs an upper stage to deorbit it. They could pull pieces of metal off of that object, feed it into our micro space foundry, and then we would turn that into rods. And a rod is a very basic thing to make, but it has a lot of applications. And one of those applications is that it can be used as propulsion. And I have sort of this third piece on this graphic of metal-based propulsion. So if you can use a metal rod as propulsion, you can effectively make your own fuel with this system from the debris that you're harvesting to propel the next mission. And that's where we think we can make our first initial impact. And then this rod making system can be used to feed in-space manufacturing. It can be used for other missions like additive manufacturing. You can use it to assemble into trusses and other things like that. And actually, I think I have some of the applications we came up we've been thinking about here. LEO ADR missions without propellant limitations. In GEO, you can remove something completely by processing it down just into its constituent parts. And then all those other things I just mentioned. So that's kind of where we are right now, and we're really excited. We're actually getting some, we've been spending 3 years kind of working on all the different pieces of this puzzle: the legal piece, the technical piece, the funding piece, and now with this new iteration, this new idea that we have, which is we've just sort of crystallized in the last 6 months. We think we're starting to get some really strong traction. We're seeing a lot of support from industry partners, and it's really exciting to see how this might come together now. I mean, there's a real sense of momentum in this happening, and I'm really excited for you guys because you're going to be able to come onto the scene if you want to become a space entrepreneur, do anything in space. And this foundation of the infrastructure that's being built, this sort of the railroads and the internet lines that you have on the ground, that sort of thing, is being built in space now, and it's going to enable ideas that we don't even think of yet, and that's the beauty of it. So that's all I had to say about the company itself. I have just some final thoughts on an entrepreneur's path, and if you want to try to go down this journey, you sort of, in some ways, you need to be able to thrive on the thrill of uncertainty, because that's the essence of being an entrepreneur, especially in sort of a frontier industry like space resources or anything in space, really. You don't know what's going to come down, and you want to see what you can make happen. You need to be adaptable, of course, to take advantage of those opportunities. And you need to be able to make sure that you're aligned with your family and that everyone's on the same page. This is actually not so much about doing the entrepreneur thing, but it's more about making sure that your life stays intact while you're an entrepreneur. If you have a family, if you're a solo entrepreneur and you're on your own, you can kind of do whatever you want. But if you have a family, you want to make sure that everybody's on the same page and understands the sacrifices that are going to need to be made, and that you're taking care of your downside, that you're not just betting it all on the future, because the odds of success are always, technically they're low. I mean, every entrepreneur thinks that they're going to make it, but we know what the statistics look like. Also, I'd like to make a point that you don't have to be, a starving entrepreneur living on ramen constantly to do this sort of thing. You can actually if you have a good idea and you've got a good team, you can pay yourself reasonably. I sort of go by the philosophy that investors want their entrepreneurs to be focused, that they're betting on. And to be focused, you have to not be desperate for money. And so I think it's okay to set your expectations that you can, live reasonably anyway. I mean, not lavishly, obviously, but, and so the last pieces are, if you're going to go down this kind of path, you want to make sure that you try to find something where there's an actual business need first. That's how we tried to approach it, even though it was way out on the edge of what's happening. We're still looking for a gap. and where there's a value proposition, and then seek out the solution instead of taking sort of what I've heard is typical among engineering-based teams where they start with a cool idea and they try to find a market. And then the last thing I would say is, this is really important. Make sure you know why you're doing it. You got to know your why, like the thing that's driving you forward. Because entrepreneurship is tough. It's going to get hard. There's lots of depressing things that happen. Things don't go your way, and you have to be able to persevere through those challenges. And we've had many. And sometimes it just takes some time to get to where you're going. If you know you've got a good idea, you have to. And to keep that attention there, you need to have that North Star that helps you stay focused on what you're doing. And for me, I really want to make an impact on the future of humanity expanding out into space. I believe that that's where we're going, and I want to go there. So I want to enable that possibility. I made a deal with my daughter when I went to the International Space University, which was that someday we together would go on a vacation to the moon. And I was going to go and try to make that happen. And so, that's sort of my why and what drives me every day. And I encourage you, if you go down this path or any other entrepreneurial path, to have that in mind. And with that, I'll happy to take any questions.
So thank you, Mr. Calnan, for a wonderful presentation. We will now have a short Q&A session. So please put your questions into the Zoom Q&A chat, and hopefully we can get as many questions answered as possible. So we'll first start with some pre-submitted questions. What is the funding process for a space startup, and how is it different compared to a normal startup?
I mean, it's changing actually a lot, but at its essence, you need to have some way to get in the beginning. Often, what happens with space, I think, that is different from other startups, especially like a software startup where the barrier to entry might be relatively low, is that you need a lot of investment up front to be able to build some hardware. If that's what you're trying to do, anyway. There's other things you can do in space that don't require building a hardware, but oftentimes with space stuff, the time horizon to go from idea to making revenues is longer than you'll find with typical startups. And because of that, you need to find some sort of patient capital. So I think government has a real role to play in the beginning in helping companies with grants and other sort of small bets that they can make on ideas. Like in the United States, we have the SBIR program, which is Small Business Innovation and Research Fund. And it starts at $125,000, which isn't a lot to build, an engineering team with, but it's enough to get started and get an idea going, and it gives you credibility. If you can get that kind of funding up front from the government, there's a lot of opportunities out there, and they're growing. The other thing I will say that's interesting about funding is that they're typically venture capitalists, where you can get the bigger money from. They want a time horizon that's, 4 to 7 years before they want their money back. And that's generally not long enough for space companies to be able to really make it. So there's been a gap there, but there are new companies being founded now that have a more patient take on capital. Like Voyager Space is a good example of that, where they're buying majority stakes in startup companies, and they're putting them all together into one portfolio of companies that can achieve lots of different capabilities. And they don't have the desire to sell them anytime soon, but they can give them access to capital, they can give them support. And that's a really cool model that's happening as well. But you still have to start somewhere to get into something like that. And I think the government has a key part to play there.
That's pretty interesting, yeah. So Mr. Tani, who used to be a teacher at ASIJ and who was also in one of your slides earlier, he was the astronaut that you took the picture with.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, so he's in the audience there.
Wow. Hello.
So he has a foundry sounds like it will require a lot of energy. How will you collect or store or handle the power needed to melt metal alloys?
Yeah, that's a good question. And actually, and it's a question that we often get from people, who don't know the way we're doing it. But it turns out that it's not as much energy as you might think. When people think of foundries, they think of like these massive, aluminum smelting plants on the earth with big vats of liquid metal, right? It looks like a ton of energy, and it is. But the method that we're planning to use is electrical induction, some possibly electromagnetic levitation, things that have been demonstrated on the space station. And we scoped it out, and at the scale that we're trying to build, so it's a smaller scale than you see in on the terrestrial planets, of course. But at the scale we're trying to build, we're thinking we can do it for like a kilowatt or less, and so it's actually feasible. Obviously, the more power you put in, the faster you melt the metal. So sometimes it comes down to a trade-off of time versus power, but it's doable with solar panels. We have looked into the idea of using solar concentrators to bring heat into the system. But there are a lot of challenges with keeping a solar concentrator pointed at the sun if you're in low Earth orbit, because you're constantly trying to rotate the craft pointed at the sun. So we're settling on solar panels as the best way to do it right now, or to deliver the power right now. Of course, in the future, that you could possibly be using compact nuclear reactors and whatnot if you're in an orbit that's far enough away from Earth where it's suitable to use that kind of technology. It's not here yet, but it may be coming.
Thank you, Mr. Tani, for the question. What is one piece of advice you would give to students choosing this career path? What about any career path?
Any career path, yeah. I saw that question earlier, and the one thing that I think about this is don't worry about having it figured out right when you graduate from high school, or even right when you graduate from college. Like, my life has gone through a winding path of different entrepreneurial ventures, different things that I thought I was interested in. For example, I was really interested in investing in stocks and trading and that sort of thing at some point in my life. I had been for a while. And so I did the CFA program to learn how to do that as a job. And I got through all these very hard tests and went down the whole process of getting my CFA designation. And as soon as I got it, and I was about to start applying for jobs to become an asset manager, I was like, I don't think I actually want to do this. I still did it anyway, just to make sure that I didn't want to do it. But, I think sometimes that's okay. I mean, if you know you don't want to do something, maybe better to switch early and not feel too bad about, I guess, sunk costs, the time you've already spent investing in one path. You don't want to be trapped in something that you don't love just because you felt like you had to do it because you were already doing it. Like, that's not a good enough reason, in my opinion. I mean, people have different opinions on this, but that's my advice. Don't worry too much about having it figured out, because your life will change and your desires will change with it.
Thank you for the question and the answer. Joey Waldman, who used to be at ASIJ, and he was a Space Club leader as well. He asked, how has the recent rise of small sat launchers and rideshare programs affected your strategy and business outlook?
Yeah, so small sats, so in some ways, that plus, I would say, the expectation that SpaceX will be successful in deploying their Starship and really dramatically reducing the cost to launch certain mass to orbit did change our perspective on the business case for our idea and the approach to take. So the advent of small launchers and the ability to do small sats and rideshare and that sort of thing makes it better for us to start with a small form factor that we can test with. So that test becomes cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, creates less of a hurdle than trying to say, we're going to build a platform, a space station that can capture, receive debris and process it and turn it into materials, which sounds like a multi-billion-dollar project. But we can test it at a small scale now. And so that idea kind of came out of that trend. And then recognizing that SpaceX is reducing the cost of launch dramatically, and I think it will come down soon enough. We're planning for that future. And so where we used to make the argument that all the debris in orbit was worth a certain amount of money because of the cost to launch the same amount of material to that same orbit, now we realize that argument has a lot less power because it just doesn't cost as much to launch to those orbits. So we're taking a different approach now, and it's not so much about the material value as it is about mission life extension and different capabilities that we can create with this metal propellant idea and other possibilities. So
Anonymous asks, if you wanted to go to the space industry but you aren't good at math, what is the best path to take?
No, I mean, the thing is, like, this is something that you learn at ISU and that they really, I guess, express strongly is that the space industry will require all aspects of the economy, regardless of what you're good at. If you believe that humanity has a future in space on a large scale, which I do, then humanity will need all of the people that we have, on the ground in space. So any talent that you have, you can leverage it to do something in space. I mean, I have people that I know who are amazing at doing graphics design and artwork and the creative side of things. And space companies need that. So like if that's what you're good at, you can do that sort of thing. You don't have to be good at math. I mean, I'm good at math and I do finance, but like that's you don't need to be even good at that necessarily to have a vision about the way the future can be and have other people on your team that can round out those skills. So there's a lot of different ways you can apply yourself to this future, I think.
What would you say is the most exciting thing about the future of space?
Oh man, the most exciting thing. I think the most exciting thing for me is the prospect that normal people will be able to go to space for a reasonable amount of money. That it won't just be the ultra rich or employees of space agencies. And I count myself among them. I imagine a future where thousands of people can come and go to space and work in space and use space and experience the overview effect that I've heard about and can't wait to enjoy someday. And I will definitely be going when the opportunity presents itself. And that to me is the most exciting thing about it. It's just human beings experiencing that future. I think there's an innate sort of curiosity and desire for us to go forth and see what's out there. And, I mean, I love science fiction and that kind of inspires me about these futures that I think can be made real. So.
Thank you for the question and the answer. Dr. O'Donoghue, who spoke at our conference last year, asks, do you think there will become a time when you've cleaned up all of the space debris available?
I mean, it's totally possible that the large debris could be cleaned up. I think that, because the new debris, the new launches that are going up are generally designed to be, deorbited at the end of their life cycle. And I think that the rules regarding that, although they're still pretty loose, technically, they're becoming, it's becoming accepted that needs to tighten up more and more and more if we want to have a usable space. So with that in mind, it's plausible that you could clean it all up. I suppose there will probably be, some pieces out there that are, in weird orbits that are too hard to get to or don't make sense to when we clean it up enough, and it's not as dangerous as it was when it's more crowded. So, maybe it won't make sense, but I think it's certainly possible.
So this is another pre-submitted question. How has the COVID-19 pandemic affected your business and the space industry in general?
You know what? The space industry has had an amazingly good year in 2020, despite the COVID-19 situation. I think that, I mean, unless you're, in a lab bending metal and building something, which obviously many people do that, then many of the jobs that people do to design things or work together can be done remotely. So at least in my company, we're a startup, we're just getting started. And so we've already been a remote team to begin with. Our team is distributed across the world. We have people in Colorado, where I am, Arizona, Germany, Belgium, and the UK. So like we're already used to working remotely. So in that way, it wasn't that much of a change. And fortunately, everyone on the team has stayed healthy. So like, I think that's the biggest impact if that happens to someone in your team. But as far as I can tell, the space industry has had a banner year last year with acquisitions, exits, I mean, especially for entrepreneurship. There's been IPOs through SPACs and all kinds of crazy things that have happened that have shown a pretty strong resiliency in the space sector. And that part of that's due to government support, I think, to some extent, but I think it's on a good path.
What was the atmosphere like at ISU in general and with regards to space as an industry?
The atmosphere was boy, like I don't know how to even characterize in one word. It was fun. It was immersive. It was enthusiastic, extremely supportive, I guess. In fact, in many ways, ISU is a very strange and unique place because you will not, as an adult, you will find no other place in the world that I can think of where people are so blindly supportive of everything that you do. So it's a great place to take risks and try things that you're not used to doing. And that's kind of the whole point, that you're coming in as an expert in one thing and you're learning about all the other stuff. And so, you know, as I would say, it's accepting and open and just really a wonderful place to be with people who are all super smart at whatever it is that they do. So.
Our last question of the day comes from another former Space Club leader. So Sechko asks, if countries and national agencies have different goals from the private sector, how would the space industry reconcile such disagreements and continue?
Wait, say that one again.
If countries and national agencies have different goals compared to the private sector, how would the space industry reconcile such disagreements and continue?
Countries have different goals. Well, they have different. Some countries have different goals with each other, and they might have different goals with the space sector. I find that most people in the space sector are not going against the grain with regards to what countries want. If you operate in the space sector in your country, you know, ultimately everything you do is authorized by the country that you are operating in. So you really don't have the option to go against them and go against policy. You can certainly advocate for different policies, and many companies do that, and they should. I think that's one way to sort of pursue a different path. But mostly for especially entrepreneurial startups, I think you need to be adaptable like anything else in entrepreneurship. And at the end of the day, right now, government involvement is still critical to the success and, you know, of this whole idea of, you know, a robust economy in space. And until there's, you know, a fully robust commercial space-to-space economy happening that's, you know, self-sustaining, you just kind of have to play ball with the government, I think, and try to align what you're working on to match what what they have interest in. You know, I also think that people who are operating companies should stay true to their values. So, you know, if you don't want your technology to be used for, say, you know, weapons or something like that, then don't. You know, you still have control over what you do. But
all right. So thank you all for coming to today's event. And thank you again to Mr. Calnan for sharing your experiences with us. Your insights into the space industry have inspired all of us today. Hopefully we can hear you speak in person sometime in the future. And to all of the attendees, have a great rest of your day.
Thanks for having me.